When horrific things happen, like the Parkland shooting or the Las Vegas attack, they're almost always followed by an outpouring of support. Friends, families, sometimes complete strangers making a kind of pilgrimage to leave mementos at those sites to remember and honor the lives lost. Eventually, those items have to be taken away. But now, they're getting a new home, a place for the grief to be archived and for the memories to live on.
It was a Sunday morning, and I was at home, and I woke up a little late, which was strange. I woke up about 9:30, and I don't have a TV. I haven't had a TV in many years, but of course through my Facebook, I see that something's going on, and at that point I think it was only about 20 people were killed, and already I knew that this was a huge event for Orlando's history.
Initially when it happened, I checked social media, of course. I have a lot of friends that still went to PULSE, so I needed to be sure that I didn't know anyone that, was there, be sure everyone's okay.
At the time, I obviously felt unsafe and very bereaved and sad. I didn't lose anybody, but just the idea that somebody could go to a bar or club in Orlando and wouldn't be safe and would be targeted for their sexual orientation was horrible.
I think probably personally my initial response was numbness. It was a surreal thing to wake up to.
I already knew it was going to be historical, and so my first thought was how awful it was, wondering where it was. I looked up where the PULSE Nightclub was and realized it was about a mile from my house and a mile from where I work. And I just thought maybe I could go get blood, and then I realized I'd done it a few weeks earlier, so I couldn't even do that. I knew that police were investigating and doctors were saving lives, and as a curator, what do? I record history.
And then I was contacted by the museum and like, hey, do you want to help us collect? At the time I was already volunteering in the archive, so I started collecting in the field and gathering stuff.
We actually had my niece's baptism was that morning, so it was something where we woke up and my husband informed me of what happened, and then we had to immediately just get ready and drive off to Mount Dora, and it was a very strange thing to be all the way in Mount Dora and to be keeping up with everything that was happening in Orlando, and all of our friends in Orlando responding to the blood drives and not being able to go and do that, and kind of being at a celebration at that time was a very strange feeling, and that was probably the biggest impact, like personally, the first day of.
So I sat down and started writing a plan. And what became was the sort of original 5-page starter to the One Orlando Collection Initiative. And that was I just sort of kept my eyes on it all day like everybody else in the community. So wrote that 5-page plan and gave that to my direct supervisor at the museum on that next day. And then it took about another week and a half for us to get official approval to begin enacting on that plan.
The History Center has always existed to tell the story of Central Florida's history, so we've had 12,000 years of history in our exhibits, and at the time of PULSE we were in the process of revisiting the permanent exhibits. We were going to start on a process to put together new exhibits when PULSE happened, and PULSE did change everything. Not only did it obviously put the permanent exhibit gallery refresh and refurbishment on hold, but also it changed the way that we looked at things and at the way we look at our history, and pushed us to the forefront of one of those institutions that now looks at current history. The things that happened last week are also to some degree some of the stories that we should attempt to tell, as well as the things that happened 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago. So it changed us in numerous ways, but mostly in our perception of what is history and what those stories are that we should be telling.
When I wrote the One Orlando Collection Initiative, the original 5-page plan needed some work, but the general idea was that our staff would begin collecting at the temporary memorial sites as soon as possible because we knew with the Florida summer sun and rains that items were just going to degrade really quickly. And memorials aren't made to be collected, but in our instance, we knew that they were going to be these just really important bits of history, of love and support from our community. So the first part of the plan was that we would collect. The second part was that we would try to get extra staff to assist us because as museum staff, we had a museum to run. We had 7 or 8 exhibits to get installed that fall, and we knew that was coming. But I think the most important part of the plan was the fact that we figured out the ability to do it here and keep the artifacts here. The Smithsonian was very interested. They came down and they had somebody looking as early as that Thursday. And so for us, we just really focused on getting started so that we could sort of make sure that the artifacts were collected by our own local institution. So my role in that was sort of heading it up. I started making a lot of the contacts. We of course had to get a lot of different approvals when events like this happen. There's a lot of players involved.
Pam came to me immediately, and as we got the process going and her and our conversations with the Smithsonian and with some of our other now partners, my primary role was to work with the county to get the support that we needed to actually get the project started, the collecting process started. That staff was out in the field after a few weeks, was out in the field daily collecting memorial items, while I was working with the county to make sure that we had the supplies, the resources that we needed to continue the process.
I don't think I knew exactly how it was going to turn out, but we all knew that we needed to do something. And I think most of us that have worked in a museum before probably weren't expecting to be able to do as much as we did, but thanks to Pamela Schwartz, our chief curator, she was really the one that spearheaded getting us a lot of the approval that we needed to really do the work that we did. Because I think a lot of museums not necessarily in instances of mass tragedy, but a lot of museums in instances of something big going on, whether it's good or bad, they only get to collect, what people happen to bring to them. So this was a very unique experience for us being able to be on the forefront of this.
Several of the sites were owned by the city of Orlando. This site, the Pulse site, was owned by, of course, the owner of the nightclub, Barbara Poma. We had to work with the county since we are partially governed by them. And there was just a lot of different moving parts, and so we started working through the motions of getting all the permissions to begin this whole collecting endeavor. Took a lot of time. So I guess you could say I sort of was the architect of the project and spearheaded it. And then once we started collecting, I was doing the same thing as the rest of my staff. We were out just carefully collecting and trying to conserve. But we were also seeking out other items. While my staff was just collecting at the memorials, I was working on getting Dr. Corsa's shoes. I was trying to look into getting a hold of Barbara Poma, which was really difficult at the beginning because she was on lockdown because of the legal aspects, but trying to get to her to see if we could collect inside of the nightclub once it was released from the FBI and things like that.
I was already overwhelmed by the site as it was. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't obviously emotionally equipped to do it, but I also wasn't what I had ever had to do before. I knew everything that left there had importance, it had value, historically, emotionally, it meant a lot to people, it meant a lot to our community, and I didn't have any way to care for those items, and didn't know what they would be needed for in the future. So to me, collecting it was the most valuable thing that could have happened at the time.
It was a lot of coordinating, a lot of communication, a lot of really long days. I mean, we were working 7 a.m. until 3 p.m. collecting, coming back to the museum, laying things out, and then it was like 6 or 7 before we started our real jobs for the day.
I was one of the people who was out there in the field picking up things, and that helped me as a storyteller immensely because as I'm picking things up, I'm making connections with them. I'm reading a letter and I'm thinking about the person who wrote it, and I'm thinking about the emotion behind what they've written. And it resonates with me personally as a member of the community, a friend to the queer community.
We decided to collect a large amount of what was left. I know a lot of museums are a little more selective, but we tried to save as much as we could. When we were going through, the only things that did not end up in our collection were things that could not survive, things that were too damaged by mold or water.
So we tried to weigh a lot of different things. we first of all thought about how long an item had been at a site. So when did we first notice it? Was it Tuesday and now it's Friday, or was it just yesterday? Is it brand new today? We tried to weigh how the item was made and how it would hold up to the elements. So if it's just a piece of paper with marker on it, the first rain is going to destroy it. If it's in one of those plastic sleeves, or if it is laminated, it might last a little longer, or if the item's like ceramic. So we really tried to weigh all the different options. We tried to leave items out as long as we could.
We wanted to preserve the fact that these were memorials. We weren't here to just grab everything that was left. We wanted these places to remain a place of healing and still be kind of a beautiful commemoration for people to come and visit.
Well, when we went to the Dr. Phillips Center, we were looking at this huge field of rainbow things. They've been exposed to a lot in terms of the elements. They were pieces of paper that were completely saturated with water, mold had begun to grow, insects were starting to nest, there were spiders, bees. It was a little treacherous, and some of the items, you know, the ink had run on many of these pictures. So since we were there every day for a series of days, we were also really good at figuring out what was new.
We really tried to sort of have, like I said, this order of operations we went through and how we selected items to be both respectful to the people leaving the items, but to also manage our time, because there were 7,000 or more artifacts out there. Some items ultimately did have to just be discarded, either because sometimes we picked up a piece of foam core that had no writing left on it. The sun and the rain had just washed it away. Some items were so broken, some items were so moldy. So we were dealing with a lot of different factors, and that's made our site unique compared to others. Like in Las Vegas, they did not have a drop of rain the entire time they were collecting after their shooting. So everything is like pristine except for the sun damage. So it's been interesting to see how a lot of the things are similar between the different sites of these mass shootings and how much they're different.
History Center is best suited to accomplish a task such as this. There was really nobody else who was ready and willing to do it. It stretched our capacity to the limit, but nevertheless, we have the chops institutionally, as it were, to actually accomplish this with a staff that knew how to, with some research and spinning up on the latest technologies and the latest ways to accomplish this, to actually go in the field and do this collecting in a methodology where we could actually get the items, record them in a way where we could have enough information to catalog them later, keep them safe, keep them stored temporarily on their way to permanent storage. We really are the only potential place to do work like that.
The other serious benefit of the One Orlando collection is, of course, the oral history aspect of it, because we were making sure that this exhibition reflected many voices and many experiences, and what better way than to reach into those oral histories and pull out quotes from people. Who better to tell that story than the actual voices of people who've experienced these things?
The original idea behind oral histories was capturing the thoughts and feelings of everyday people as an event unfolded. So it kind of started roughly about the same time as the Civil Rights Act. So it was recording activists and why they thought it was important, what their everyday life was. Because, in 30 or 40 years, there's going to be an academic who's going to sit down and he's going to try and write the story. And it makes it more full, and it includes more voices if we have the thoughts and feelings of people, especially in some, large capacity. So previous works were kind of guessing, using polling data and stuff like that, but we use oral history now as a way to try and concretely understand why people feel the way they feel and how they feel about the things that happen.
We've done over, probably close to, at this point, 200 oral histories. And like I mentioned, we'll be collecting far into the future. In 20 years, we'll still be getting artifacts. 9/11 is still doing oral histories with people, this many years later.
We're trying to get anyone who was involved in the response to PULSE, whether that be as a survivor or a victim's family, but also religious leaders, governmental leaders. It could be local philanthropists, people involved in the nonprofit response, local businesses, mental health providers. I think it was 650 showed up in the first 2 days to provide emergency mental health care. Anybody who was involved in that kind of rapid response. and artists as well, the artist response as well. Because of the nature of the questions, or because of the nature of the event and how traumatic it is, we try and keep them very open-ended, so people can answer however they freely want to, because once you don't want to push them into a corner and force them to talk about something they're uncomfortable with, but also because it just ends up that those are the best answers. So open-ended questions about their what they did, kind of the day-to-day of how they did it, and also what kind of preparation it took to do. So for an artist, if you did a a panel of this huge painting, how long did it take? How much did the materials cost? How long did you spend doing it? Or like the quilts, how much does a quilt cost to make? How many quilts did you get from outside? How many quilts did your members make? I mean, those kind of questions. What was the toll that it took on your organization?
Well, we learned through doing an oral history that some of the items that we thought were just garbage, we can't keep everything. And when you find an empty Coca-Cola bottle that still has Coke residue and just some rocks in it, and then an empty box of fruit snacks, you're like, okay, so somebody just had a picnic? Well, little did we know until later that it was a very important picnic, and it was the family of Luis Vielma who had gone, and he loved fruit snacks. And they'd gone and they would bring a box of fruit snacks, and each person in their little picnic party would have a bag, and they would leave a bag for Luis. And the Coke bottle was, one of those special ones that said have a Coke with Luis. And so they had a Coke and fruit snacks with him. And sometimes we don't learn these stories till later, so all we can do is record those stories. It is one of those things that makes collecting at temporary memorials so difficult, because you don't know the provenance of these items. And sometimes what can seem like a silly, simple little thing becomes one of the most important stories in your collection once you understand who and why they left it.
I think the thing that always kind of surprises me is that it still is hard to talk about. That's the thing that always strikes me, is there is some angle that you've never heard of before, or some description of it that you've never thought of, that still makes it such a difficult thing to discuss with somebody.
An artist left a little drawing of Mickey Mouse with the pride flag, and it was on this very small piece of paper, and it was actually here at Dr. Phillips. It was on the corner of the memorial right here, and we hadn't gotten approval to collect any items. We were, as a staff, we had walked around Lake Eola, and we came over here and walked DPAC to just look at the condition of some things. We were taking some photos. And that's one of the first things I saw when we got to DPAC, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I immediately felt almost sick to my stomach that we weren't allowed to collect at that moment, because I saw this tiny, delicate piece of paper, and I just knew that wasn't whenever we got the approval to collect, that wasn't going to be there anymore. So several days after that, we got the approval to collect. We came out to DPAC in the morning. That is the first place I went. I went directly to that corner, and it was still there. And I immediately picked it up. Amazingly, even though it had rained, you couldn't even see any water damage on it. And so that piece, there's a lot of pieces. I mean, it spoke to me as far as its content, but it also spoke to me as far as I feel very personally attached to it, because I feel like I saved it, that someone left it, and then we were there to save it.
I don't exactly remember what site this was picked up at. It might have been Pulse, but it was a sign that a little boy left. So it's the sign, a picture of the boy, and a message. And the message says something along the lines of, I held this sign on the steps of the White House when my dad got married. And that was one of the, for me, I just get chills thinking about it. It's probably one of my favorite artifacts that I have on there.
Being with items from day one, picking it up in the field, dusting it off, cleaning it off in the field, bringing it here, just being with any of these items from the day we pick it up to where it is stored for the rest of its life. Each artifact has a life cycle. So I like being a part of that process.
Collecting inside of the club was probably one of the most challenging things. Just being inside of where this happened and trying to be able to figure out what items are going to best tell this story in 200 years, and then figuring out how to get them out of a building whose structure you need to leave intact was difficult.
And I knew that everything inside that building would be important someday. Didn't know what was going to happen to the building, didn't know what was going to happen to any of those items, but just knew that for right then and there, it needed to stay intact. So while I intellectually understood the importance and agreed 100% with making sure we secured those artifacts, it was really personally hard for me because, I mean, it's hard for me now. Imagine 3 years ago when I was still just trying to get out of bed every day.
Going into the club, that we knew that there were several items that we wanted to collect to preserve. Some of which we knew we probably would never display, but we felt they were important to preserve for research purposes and just the natural preservation of the historical event. The two items that I was charged with making sure that we could collect was a door to one of the restrooms that had a stained glass window inset in it that was full of bullet holes. And that glass was shattered, so we had to stabilize the glass, and then we had to protect it so that when we transported the door, that it would stay intact. So I had to build a custom frame and clamp mechanism for the glass and for the door so that it would stay intact when we moved it. The other was a section of the bathroom wall with ceramic tile, which was also full of bullet holes and cracks and shattering. And I had to devise a way to not only safely transport it, but also to physically cut this out of the club without the tile coming apart and hitting the floor. So I had to come up with a few creative methods to secure it and stabilize it before cutting into it. There were other items that we collected, such as the cabinet that the dancers hid in, the sink that people climbed on to get out. And these were all iconic items of the event.
When we collect at these sites, there's thousands of items. We've collected over 5,000 from the temporary memorials, over 7,000 with items we've collected outside the memorials. We've got terabytes of photography. We have so much stuff. So we learn about some of these items after the fact. And so part of, the best part of our doing this online digital memorial has been that people can go and look and find items and then contact us and let us know what the story was. And likewise with the exhibition at the first year and then the second year, doing those exhibits has allowed us to gain some of those stories.
My main role as a digital archivist was to develop the digital online memorial. It's a variety of items from the memorials, items that have been donated after the fact, digital photographs. So it's a way that people who can't come to the History Center, to Orlando, can actually see these items for themselves. We live in such a digital age nowadays that we have people who will try to donate their iPhone photographs, which are great because sometimes it's something that we haven't seen yet and it adds to our collection something that we don't have. But at the same time, it gets a little difficult because of the mass of it. And then you have the issue of storage, and digital archiving is relatively new, so there's really not a best kind of practice, especially for this specific kind of event. We're learning as we go and developing what works best for us as we learn what doesn't work and what does. I think it's been helpful for people to be able to see the kind of things that were picked up at the memorials but have also been brought into us as well. So I tried to make an even amount of items to represent each victim so that one individual isn't reflected more than another. I try to find things with a lot of stories, which was another part of my job. Was we have all these memorial items that people left, and then I kind of, as I was curating what was going to go on to the website, researched those items. So if it was one name on a teddy bear, I was able to go and find that person and figure out what day they left it at the memorial. And because again, we live in such a digital era where people are posting everything and anything online, how they feel, where they are, what they're doing. So I'm kind of able to get an idea of the mindset these people were in when they were leaving something at a memorial. So that's kind of another thing that I go with, is if I can find a story, if there is a story, if it's visually compelling, it's really, like I was saying, you're not doing that work for you. And that's what makes the digital memorial so great, is because it's for the community in Orlando and to see how we responded, but it's also for the internationally people can go look at this. So it's easy for someone to be able to go and see the kind of things that were left at memorials when they weren't able to go to a memorial themselves, whether that be because of distance, because of emotions, or anything along those lines.
The little things, our kids mattered, and they wanted to show how much they cared and loved by leaving these little things or pictures or, words of encouragement for us that helps us get through.
It's my motivation, it's encouragement, knowing that they're there thinking of our children, thinking of them, and they wanted to be part of it. Yeah. What is important for us is that they're not going to be forgotten.
Coming up for the 1-year remembrance mark, June 12th, 2017, we had all of these items and people had been asking to see them. We had the digital memorial, but it's just not the same as seeing the items. So we endeavored to create an exhibition, and it was the first exhibition in the history of our institution, largely where we created an exhibition solely based on our own collection. We often get traveling exhibits from like the Smithsonian or from the Burke or other types of institutions, but we created these exhibits fully in-house with our own artifacts. And they were also the first fully bilingual exhibitions that our institution had ever done, because it was Latin night and a large amount of the most affected population are Spanish speaking only. We needed to be inclusive of them. It didn't make sense for us to take these items, especially some of those that are written in Spanish themselves, and put them on display with only English text. And so it was very important to us that we were able to do that. And it was interesting to hear the feedback. People were surprised it was in Spanish. They had not thought of our institution as being a very welcoming for Spanish-speaking individuals in the past. And so now in the future, we are doing that much more often. We've also had exhibits fully bilingual in Vietnamese since then.
It is important to collect these things because it helps the families, and to me that's the most important thing. It helps them to know that their loved ones will be remembered, and that's why we do what we do.
Curation is super important. It's the way that museums convey a story to an audience, and they work to make sure that that story gets across to multiple kinds of people, from little kids through adults. In the case of this exhibition, where we were specifically addressing the story of PULSE, we wanted to make sure that everyone who's been affected by PULSE in any way felt their experience represented in these walls. And we were able to do that because of the incredible collection that we gathered beginning a couple weeks after PULSE took place, and built this incredible collection of thousands of objects that were hand lifted, hand dried, carefully treated and packaged, and then cataloged, so we knew exactly what we had. Part of curation is picking out what goes on display. And for a collection that is this humongous, one big benefit for me, of course, was actually physically being there in the field and already having a relationship with those objects. But another huge benefit of that was Jess over in collections, because while I have seen a lot of the objects, she has seen all of the objects. And if I ask her, hey Jess, I'd like to do a case that's just small flags. What are all the small flags we have in the collection? And then she'll send me a list of the accession numbers, and then I can look at them individually one by one in our records and see, oh, this one has a really good message on it. This would be really good to put on display.
The first step is to conserve it, clean it of candle wax, dirt, bugs, dried flowers, any of the things that were left on it from being outside. So conserving the item, photographing the item, cataloging it in the database. That includes measuring it, doing a condition report on it. Then I mark it, tag it, and then store it. During the cataloging process, every single item is typed into the database. So every card, every letter, every poster, every item, I have to type those words into the database. So that becomes very difficult to do. And like I said, at times I have to walk away, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I love what I do, and I love that I can help families.
She was incredibly helpful for pulling together in this exhibition our Sites of Solidarity wall, for example. And that was where she noticed, hey, we have a lot of things from other places that have experienced mass violence. And so I said, oh, could you put together a list of those things? And she did. She had already put together a pretty significant list of all these other locations: Oak Creek, Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, all these different locations where we had received things from places that had also experienced mass violence and that they were reaching out to uplift us. So at the end of the day, the important thing is that these objects tell powerful stories, and you know which ones are the most powerful when you're looking at them.
I'm just happy that we did this, and I'm happy that, we will be able to tell the story of Orlando years from now, and this is a part of it. And it's a very sad part of it, but the fact that those victims will never be forgotten really means a lot. And, speaking with family members and knowing that they appreciate what we do means the world to all of us.
We continue to improve the work we do, and we've learned a lot from our community in the last 2 years. But interesting things we've learned about through the exhibit, when people come in, they've been to the temporary memorials, they've seen these piles of things, and it was really different for a lot of people to see the way a museum takes one artifact and focuses on it. And so items they might not have even noticed in the original temporary memorials, they get to see and they get to hear the story because we've learned it from the individual who left it.
I had to design several pieces to go into the hall, specific cases for protecting certain artifacts, as well as the planter that you saw at the entrance into the exhibit. In one of the sites, they found a planter that had a number of pinwheels and flags, and as the breeze would come by, the pinwheels would just gently blow in the breeze. And so they wanted to recreate that effect. We could have done that just with fans, but they wanted the randomness. So embedded down inside the planter, we have a number of fans that are being run by a microcontroller that randomly turns the fans on and off to simulate just the natural randomness of breeze. It was a very peaceful, very quieting atmosphere. The appearance of it out at the site amongst all the memorials and things was just, it helped take your mind off of what you were surrounded by. We just felt that that was important to try to bring back into the museum and recreate.
It was just really powerful. We took great care in the choice of our vocabulary. We did not want to use words that were not reflective of how our community was feeling and thinking at the time. So we were really careful about that, but we were also careful to make sure that the exhibit was healing in nature. We didn't want it to be re-traumatizing. We didn't want it to be overly analytical, especially at the 1 year. The case wasn't even really closed yet. And so since the case wasn't closed, we couldn't do a lot of hard interpretation. When we think of things that happened 100 years ago, it's a little easier to talk about them. So we really focused on the love and support that came out after the fact. And now for the 2-year exhibit, it's similar in that we share stories and artifacts, but a lot of the stories are much deeper this year because we've had time to cultivate them and to learn them.
Whenever we create exhibitions, whenever we're telling stories, it's my job to pull together all of the resources necessary to come up with a narrative that gives a complete picture of something that's happened in Orlando history. I'm probably not alone in saying that I was a member of the community who was just reeling, trying to figure out what to do. Like, what could I possibly do to try to right the wrong that's taken place here, as immense as it is, And for the first couple weeks, we were pretty, I would say that, at least speaking for myself, I felt pretty lost. I couldn't imagine just coming to work and doing business as usual. And because Pam put together this project, the One Orlando Collection Initiative, it put us all to work actually doing something. And being able to do that for our community, to try to show our community, look, your history is important. This is one of the worst days Orlando's ever experienced. It needs to be in a museum, and we need to do everything we can to show them that their voices and their experiences and the mementos they brought in mourning belong in a museum. So it gave us a lot of purpose. It made us feel like we were able to give back to our community and show them how important their feelings were.
We collect things as somebody's grandmother passes away and they bring them and they donate it. Contemporary collecting is a new wave for museums. There's so much going on every single day, especially in Orlando. How do you know what is important enough to collect? Well, we knew that this was, and so we began collecting. As we took on the collecting at this site and for the PULSE Nightclub shooting, we have had to reach out and work with other institutions who've experienced it. So just a month after what happened here, we had the Dallas police shootings, and we had a call from a curator in Dallas who said, how do I begin doing oral histories? How do I talk to all these families and all these people who are sad or angry or upset? And so we worked with her. And then, of course, within 16 months, the Las Vegas shooting had happened, and we started working with them. And so we've become advocates in a way that we never thought we would be, in helping other museums to deal with these situations in their own community. But we also, by sharing things like this in the exhibit, you'll notice in the 2-year exhibition, we have a little box, and it says, "We stand with you," and it has the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the idea was that we thought there would probably be up to 4 more mass shootings by the end of our exhibition, which was going to run for 4 months. So we allotted 4 slots for 4 months, and we've filled 2 of those slots already. The exhibit is open for another few months. So that is one of those things where museums are usually supposed to be unbiased fact givers, but we can put things on the wall that make people stop and think about the choices they're making and what's happening in society. So we become advocates not only for other museums who are going through this and becoming part of the network to help them, but we've also sort of just become advocates for a better world in general.
At the beginning, I was like crying every day and, getting emotional, but I think as, we've got a little handle on it, it's not been as overwhelming.
It is something that a lot of places in this country are having to deal with, and they never thought they would have to. But we have become a tight-knit group with other sites of violence, other locations who have had to deal with the same thing. So we are forming this little connection with other places and becoming a support system for each other. They need advice, they call us. When it happened to us, we reached out to other people, and we sought the same advice, and I think that it's a growing community among museum and institutions that document this kind of stuff.
I wasn't thinking of it professionally at all. Obviously, this is an event that happened. We were all kind of reeling, and it wasn't until you had actually contacted the State Museum. I have a friend who works there, and she contacted me and said, "Oh, we haven't even thought about this, but we should probably come up with some kind of way to start collecting items."
A lot of what we were learning could be really useful when this happens again. Not if, but when. And so we started writing it down, and right now we've got about a 73-page draft of what's called a rapid response collecting toolkit. And that guide, what we'll be doing is sourcing information and sourcing tips and hints and case studies from other institutions that have been through this, for the last 20, 50, however many years. And that guide will all be put together, and then when this happens someplace else in City X and a certain amount of people die, we'll be able to send them this guide, and they'll be able to use it. They aren't gonna have to start from scratch. They're not gonna have to take a 4-hour overwhelming phone call from me trying to be like, you need to think about this, and then you have to do this, and then this is gonna happen, and then whatever. Because all of these cases are really circumstantial. PULSE was not like Parkland. PULSE, you were dealing with language barriers. With Parkland, you were dealing with students, so different ages. And so Las Vegas, you were dealing with a ton of people who weren't even from Las Vegas, right? So the guide is sort of meant to be general enough in nature that it's food for thought. It's for somebody to take and spur their own thoughts about what's going to be necessary in their own communities, but it's not, a one-size-fits-all sort of situation. So the idea is that we'll be able to provide that guide. In that guide will also be contact information. And so when something happens in your city, as a museum, you can look in that guide, you can look at a list of individuals who've done this, you can find the person whose situation you feel best aligns to what happened to you, and you can call on them. And you can say, hey, I've been through the guide, I've got a few more questions, could you help? And there will be a network of museum professionals who are willing to do that, because there's no reason for somebody to have to go through such a difficult situation on their own.
I had been to the site every single day and had realized the magnitude of what was being left there. And just looking at item by item by item and realizing every single one of them had a story that whoever left that there, it was extremely personal to them, that they were expressing their heartbreak and that they wanted to really stand with Orlando or stand with their friends, and that they understood that coming there and leaving their item was personal, and I learned that it was personal. I also learned that I was ill-equipped to handle all of these items. I had no resources. I didn't know what to do with them. I just knew they were important. So I knew that the collection from day one was an important thing for the History Center to do for us.
The team was just remarkable, and the amount of work that they accomplished and are still accomplishing on this project is of course ongoing with the cataloging, collecting oral histories, but it's been simply remarkable. The growth in the staff now to become leaders in this type of collecting in the entire nation, the national awards that they have won on behalf of the History Center, the presentations at different conferences and such. I mean, we are now recognized as one of the leaders in collecting and presenting current history in the nation. So it is, by leaps and bounds has this institution grown. It's been a great training center for this, and the staff that are here as they move on to different roles and different capacities are certainly going to take that expertise with them. So not only was it a great accomplishment for us in the community and serving the community of Central Florida and Orange County, but it also really trained a staff to become very dynamic, very open to new ideas, and realizing the important role that a History Center can play in collecting current history.
Our staff was taken out of their element. I mean, some of the staff weren't even working in the same department. This would have been something typically considered to be a collections department activity, and we had people from exhibits. We had volunteers, so not even museum staff, who really stepped up to help. And we sort of became our own battalion. We became really tight-knit, and we figured out our process. And part of what helped us, I think, get through the work was having each other and just working so hard all of the time. It was when you sat down that it got hard. So our staff is incredible. They're now 4-time national award-winning staff. And that's not only for the One Orlando project, it's for all the projects we've had going on simultaneously while we've worked on this PULSE project. And we still do something PULSE related every day. So whereas a lot of the world has moved on from this, our community hasn't, our staff hasn't. It's something that we'll continue to collect for 10, 15, 20 years to come. So I could not have asked for a better, more incredible, dedicated staff.
We were extremely tired and worn down in a lot of ways, physically, emotionally, and I think it brought all of us a lot closer together as colleagues.
I think, if anything, it's reestablished in me the importance of the work that we do, because I can't imagine what a historical work would be like about this event in Central Florida if it didn't include the voices of the people who lived it. It would just be Sentinel articles, or maybe the Weekly, and that would be kind of it. And that would be fine, but the kind of experiences that people have and how they react to things like the anniversary events and stuff like that would just be gone. And I think that would be a true loss for our community, and also for how people remember these types of events.
It has been the most difficult 2.5 years of my career. No curator is prepared for this. They don't really go into it planning to be a curator of contemporary artifacts that have so much emotion around them. I would say the most difficult parts are navigating the waters with politics. I mean, these are highly sensitive events. There are legal issues. You're dealing with law enforcement. You're dealing with governance structures. And so trying to make sure everyone's on the same page and understands what you're trying to do is challenging. And ultimately, we did a really good job of navigating that, I think. Working with families. You're trying to work with families who have just lost a family member. And that's hard for so many reasons, and dealing with survivors, just community members. It's just a high emotion event.
Definitely, brings to the forefront that tomorrow is not guaranteed. That random things can occur, and so it's important to spend time with your loved ones while you have the time, and don't put it off. In dealing with this for so long. For months on end, and it was important to some degree to detach from it and to compartmentalize and look at it solely as, this is an artifact that needs to be protected, it needs to be collected, as opposed to what it actually was. In some cases, that was the only way to get through it.
We are a very tight-knit team. We've been through something that was very emotionally driven. We're very close and we're very bonded. We've been through something that not a lot of institutions have been through, and we've become a lot closer because of it. Personally, I value life a little differently now, because you never know when something like this can happen. So you learn to respect life a little more.
You're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the individuals who have been touched by this in any way. So that is the survivors, the families, the person who was so scared to come out to their family, and then PULSE happened and then they decided to.
I don't think any of our staff would have described themselves as being insensitive to these tragedies that happen around the world, but it definitely gives you a different perspective when it happens in your own hometown.
And I would say another thing that was really difficult was trying to understand how to best care for my staff. We do suffer a level of secondary trauma, and trying to make sure that they were cared for, especially during such long, grueling hours with such high emotion things. I don't have a psychology background, so it was a lot of, trying to figure it out as we go and what people needed and how to best help them through what they were all dealing with. So, and everybody had to do that a little bit in their own way.
I've learned that self-care is very important. When you are getting emotionally affected by these things while you're processing them, you need to take time to walk away. And you need to take time to breathe and to watch a funny animal video, or call a friend, or you have to step out of it every once in a while, because it does really affect you emotionally.
PULSE impacted us all in a variety of ways. I don't think as a community and most of us individually will be the same afterwards. So a great impact, a very immediate impact. I was out in the collecting fields for a few days as we began the process, and that was some very difficult work, as I'm sure the staff will tell you as we move along. So it's impacted us all. It's also changed my perspective of the History Center and what we're about. It's changed, I think, the perspective that you have on life, the perspective that you have in general about your life and your place and role in it. So it's been a very large impact on me, and I'm sure it's been a big impact on the entire staff.
This whole project allowed me to put a lot of what I learned in grad school, a lot of the best practices I'd always kind of hoped to put to play, to use. So I got to be a fully fledged, fully operational museum professional working on a story of social justice, frankly, and that's incredibly powerful. But PULSE has definitely changed me forever. It's going to be part of my DNA forever. It's the tattoo on my left arm now. Orlando's never going to be the same, and I don't think any one of us who've worked on this project will be the same either.
I really have a different perspective on the work that I do, how important it is, but also seeing museums as a source of community healing. It's just not a thing I thought about. We were educators, right? And we were like, hey, we've got some really cool stuff, let us tell you about it. But seeing a museum as a healing space where people can go and learn, but also be comforted by what they're seeing, has been a really pivotal moment for me professionally. And personally, I am just trying to be a kinder person. That is all I can really say about that, because I've learned a lot about all the different walks of life and what people go through. And when you meet a survivor at Wendy's, you don't know what they've been through in their life. And you can judge people and you can say things, but you just don't know. So trying to actively be kinder to everybody I meet and in everything I do, that is what's come out of it for me.